People hoarding duck-flavored crackers in 2012 sounds like a total punchline, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It sounds as a joke.
Right. But it actually points to this massive, just global blind spot that we are going to explore today on this deep dive.
Yeah, it really does.
Because if you think back to that time, the Mayan calendar was supposedly ending. Doomsday predictions were literally everywhere.
Everyone was panicking over like a calendar running out of pages.
Exactly. And based on these incredibly literal interpretations of ancient calendars and, scriptures, people actually prepared for the physical end of the world.
Which is just wild to think about now.
It is. They bought out stockpiles of survival gear. They hoarded these duck biscuits specifically because apparently they had a really long shelf life.
Duck biscuits, of all things.
I know, right? And they literally waited in the dark with their lighters for the cosmos to just collapse. We were talking about the sun burning out, the moon turning to blood, and stars physically plummeting from the sky to the earth.
Yeah, and it's a phenomenon that really highlights a fascinating and honestly sometimes terrifying quirk of human psychology.
What do you mean by that?
Well, we just deeply crave the literal. I mean, it's comforting in this bizarre way.
Comforting. Preparing for the apocalypse is comforting.
Well, yeah, because we want to be able to touch the apocalypse, right? To prepare for it with a concrete shopping list rather than grapple with what those ancient images might actually mean on a psychological or societal level.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Like the idea of the physical sky falling is terrifying, sure, but it's a known quantity. It's a disaster movie.
You can buy canned goods for a disaster movie.
Exactly. But dealing with the collapse of our internal world or our societal structures, that's, much harder to prepare for. You can't buy duck crackers for a psychological collapse.
That is such a good point. And that psychological quirk is the exact entry point for the material we are unpacking today.
It's a pretty intense source we're looking at.
It really is. It's highly analytical, intensely provocative, and it proposes this massive paradigm shift. It asks a really fundamental question. What if we have been reading the oldest texts in human history completely, totally wrong?
Yeah, the foundational texts.
Right. I'm talking about the big ones. From the Bible and the Quran to the Tao Te Ching and the Diamond Sutra, what if they aren't history books at all?
Which is how most people read them.
Exactly. But what if they are entirely constructed of encrypted parables and prophecies?
And, the analysis we're reviewing doesn't just suggest they are partially encrypted or, sprinkled with the occasional metaphor.
Right. It goes way further.
Way further. It argues that these texts are fundamentally sealed. That is the specific terminology the author uses. Sealed.
Meaning what exactly?
Meaning they are written in a comprehensive code of spiritual metaphors that have been systematically and globally misunderstood as literal historical narratives for thousands of years.
That is a massive claim.
It is. The author posits that the entire infrastructure of how we read these texts is built on a fundamental category error. We've been reading, poetry and psychological blueprints as if they were physical engineering manuals and historical logs.
Okay, so for you listening right now, consider this the ultimate exercise in critical thinking. We are going on a journey to decode these parables hidden within the scriptures.
It's going to be quite the rabbit hole.
Oh, we are going deep. We're going to examine exactly why the analysis claims these texts are constantly misunderstood, the absolute logical absurdities that arise when we try to apply literal physics to them.
The physics part is my favorite.
It's so funny. And we'll also look at the profound, sometimes devastating real-world consequences of mistaking a spiritual metaphor for a historical fact.
Because it's not just harmless misunderstandings.
No, it really isn't. So think about the religious or cultural traditions you grew up with. How many of the stories you were taught in Sunday school or at temple or just through cultural osmosis were presented to you as literal historical facts?
Probably most of them. For the average person.
Right. Well, today is about taking off those literal glasses we've been taught to wear since childhood and looking at human culture's foundational texts through a completely new decoded lens.
And it's a lens that challenges almost everything we take for granted about tradition. So to start, I think we have to look at the granddaddy of all historical misunderstandings.
Yeah.
The very beginning of these texts. The source argues that scriptures are essentially prophecies intended for the latter days, not historical accounts of the past.
Okay, wait, let me stop you right there because that feels like a massive semantic jump.
How so?
Well, When most people open up Genesis, the very first line is, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth."
Right.
That reads structurally and grammatically like a cosmological history lesson. It reads like a literal account of how the physical dirt and the physical sky were formed. How does the source justify framing that as a prophecy instead of a history?
That's the core of the whole argument, really. It comes down to looking closely at the internal logic of the texts themselves, rather than, the traditions built up around them over centuries.
So, reading the text on its own terms.
Exactly. The analysis points out that the texts frequently declare their own prophetic nature. Like, for instance, in the book of Isaiah, there is a verse where the divine voice literally declares the end from the beginning.
The end from the beginning, okay.
Now, if the beginning is declaring the end, then the beginning isn't a history of the past, is it? It's a coded blueprint for the future.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Therefore, creating the heavens and the earth is interpreted here not as a past physical event that happened billions of years ago, but as a prophecy about a future spiritual or societal creation.
So the dirt and the sky aren't dirt and sky.
Right. The heavens and the earth are metaphors for states of being or structures of human society.
Wait, I struggle with that a bit, I have to be honest.
Pushback.
If the goal of these ancient authors was to provide a blueprint for human evolution, or like a guide for a future society, why hide it behind a sealed code?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. I mean, why not just write a clear psychological manual? Why risk thousands of years of bloody misunderstandings? If you have a message that important, why bury it in metaphors about dirt and sky?
Well, that is the core paradox of the sealed scroll concept. The author's argument is that the text simply cannot be understood until the human mind and human society as a whole has evolved to a point where the substance or the real-world manifestation of the prophecy actually appears.
So we physically couldn't understand it until now.
Basically, yes. The source uses a really compelling analogy to explain this mechanism. Imagine someone is describing their mother to a friend who has never met her.
Okay, I'm picturing that.
The friend hears the description, right? She's kind, she's tall, she has a certain cadence to her voice, a specific kind of smile. Now, to the friend listening, those words are just abstract concepts. They're hovering in the air. They are essentially a prophecy of a person.
Because they haven't experienced the person yet.
Exactly. They remain a sealed mystery, a theoretical construct, until the exact moment that mother physically walks into the room.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Right. Only when the real-world manifestation, the actual substance of the description appears, does the friend look at the woman, look back at the description, and say, ah, now I understand what those words actually meant.
Reality unseals the words.
Precisely. The reality unseals the words.
That is a fascinating way to look at it. The words are a placeholder for a future reality that the reader just hasn't experienced yet.
Yeah, they are containers waiting to be filled.
But if we follow this logic, right, that these texts aren't historical,
Mm.
doesn't that completely strip away the foundation of these major world religions?
A lot of people would argue that yes.
I mean, for billions of people, the historical truth of Moses parting the Red Sea, or Jesus walking on water, or Muhammad's physical night journey, that is the bedrock of their faith.
It is the foundation, yes.
So if the author is saying it's all just a metaphor, aren't they basically saying the texts are empty, that it's all fake?
Well, the perspective presented here actually argues the exact opposite, which is what makes this paradigm shift so profound. The author argues that treating these texts as literal history is what actually makes them useless.
Useless? Wow. That is an incredibly strong word to use for texts that have literally shaped global civilization.
It is strong, but think about it rationally from a perspective of personal transformation.
Okay.
If Moses literally parted a physical body of water 3,000 years ago, or if a literal man named Jonah literally survived in the gastrointestinal tract of a large fish.
Which is biologically impossible, but...
Right, but even if it did happen historically, how does that historical fact save or transform you, the reader, today?
I guess. It doesn't.
Exactly. A historical event in the distant past is static. It's over. It happened to someone else. You can admire it, you can sing songs about it, you can make paintings of it, but you cannot participate in it.
Because you weren't there. It's just a trivia fact about the ancient Middle East.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But if you elevate these stories from historical logs to what the author calls spiritual science, the entire function of the text changes.
Spiritual science. I like that phrase.
It's a great term. Because if Egypt is not the physical country in North Africa, but a metaphor for a state of worldly bondage and like addiction to physical desires.
Okay, applying the metaphor.
And if the Red Sea is the psychological boundary of leaving that old mindset. And if the Promised Land is a state of spiritual enlightenment and internal peace.
Oh, wow.
Right? Suddenly, the text isn't a history book about dead people. It becomes a timeless blueprint for human transformation that is happening right now inside the reader.
Okay, that completely flips the utility of the text, because if it's history, it happened to them. But if it's a metaphor, it's happening to you.
You become the main character of the text.
It's almost like treating a brilliant psychological survival manual as if it were a dry Wikipedia article about ancient geography.
That is a fantastic way to put it.
By clinging to the literal history, we are entirely missing the active psychological instructions. We're reading the wrong genre.
That is the tragedy of the unthinking obedience to tradition that the author critiques. We are taught from a very young age to blindly follow the interpretations of clergy or authority figures who insist on the historical reading.
Because that's how they were taught.
Yeah, we just absorb it. We're told this is what happened physically, and because we lack the critical thinking tools at 5 or 6 years old, we just nod our heads.
And we build our whole worldview on it.
But because the texts were sealed, humanity basically got stuck in this literal reading. And that literalism isn't just a harmless misunderstanding.
Right, it has real consequences.
It creates logical paradoxes that are frankly catastrophic when you actually sit down and apply critical thought to them.
Which is the perfect bridge into the cosmic absurdities the source outlines.
Yes, let's talk about the cosmos.
Because it's one thing to accept that something like a historical battle might have been embellished, like maybe there were 10 guys instead of 10,000, right?
Sure, people exaggerate history all the time.
But the psychological barrier to giving up literalism gets much, much higher when these texts start talking about the literal end of the physical universe.
People cling to the apocalypse.
They really do. Let's look at what happens when we apply this literal historical lens to the most dramatic parts of the scriptures, the end times.
The apocalypse is perhaps the ultimate test case for the danger of literalism. The author breaks down the apocalyptic imagery found in books like Matthew in the New Testament and Isaiah in the Old Testament.
These are verses most people know, even if they aren't religious.
Yeah, they are deeply embedded in our cultural consciousness. The sun turning black, the moon not giving its light, and the stars falling to the earth.
Right, and this goes back to our duck cracker hoarders in 2012.
The duck crackers.
When you read this literally and you actually try to map it onto physical reality, you run into an insurmountable, terrifying physics problem. Let's actually do the math here, just to emphasize the absurdity the author is pointing out.
Please, let's look at the physics.
If the literal sun in our solar system simply stops shining, if it just clicks off, the universe doesn't just get a little dark, prompting you to light a candle.
Not at all. Not even close.
Right.
Because the ambient temperature of space is brutally, unfathomably cold. Without the continuous thermal radiation from the sun, the temperature on Earth would plummet drastically and immediately.
Like, how cold are we talking?
We are talking about approaching absolute zero, or minus 273.15 degrees Celsius.
At absolute zero, thermodynamic work stops entirely, like molecules start moving.
Exactly.
The atmosphere itself would freeze and fall to the ground as a solid snow. Life as we know it is extinguished in a fraction of a biological second.
It's instantaneous.
You aren't sitting in your living room eating canned goods. You are instantaneously frozen solid. Your duck crackers are frozen solid.
Everything is a block of ice. And then the analysis moves to the stars, which is even funnier.
Ah, the falling stars.
The text says, the stars will fall to the earth. Again, applying literal physics to this poetic image creates a scenario that defies basic comprehension of scale.
Because a star isn't a little glowing dot.
Right. A single star, like our sun, is over 1 million times the volume of the Earth. And many stars visible in the night sky are vastly, vastly larger than that.
So if a literal star falls to Earth, or even gets within millions of miles of our orbit, the Earth doesn't get pelted with shiny little meteorites.
No, it's not a meteor shower.
The gravitational pull would rip the planet apart, and the radiant heat would vaporize the Earth instantly. It's not a localized disaster. It's the total annihilation of the physical planet. There is no Earth for the star to hit.
Yet the author explicitly points out that people actively, literally prepare for these events as if they were manageable weather anomalies.
Like a bad hurricane?
Yeah. The author mentions observing this firsthand in China during the 2012 panic. People were hoarding candles for when the sun goes out, and buying massive quantities of compressed duck crackers to survive the darkness.
It reveals a total suspension of critical thought.
It really does. You have people acknowledging an event that would vaporize the solar system, and their defense mechanism is a wick, some wax, and a biscuit.
It's like reading a recipe that calls for baking a cake at -500 degrees, and instead of questioning the recipe, you just put on a heavier sweater before turning on the oven.
That is exactly what it's like.
It's a complete failure to recognize the genre of the information you are interacting with. We are applying literal astrophysics to spiritual poetry.
And, the author doesn't just mock the ancient traditions here. They bring this critique right up to the modern day
Really? How so?
by pointing out modern secular equivalents of this literal apocalyptic thinking. Look at the pervasive cultural narrative surrounding Elon Musk and SpaceX.
Oh, this is an interesting pivot.
There is this deep-seated, almost subconscious cultural belief born from centuries of these literal apocalyptic readings that the Earth is doomed to physical destruction.
Like perhaps by a falling star or an asteroid.
Exactly. And that our only salvation is to build physical, metallic spaceships to physically escape to a literal Mars.
Wow. Wait, so the author is suggesting that even our modern technologically advanced space programs are, on some psychological level, being driven by a literal misinterpretation of an ancient spiritual metaphor.
That is exactly the argument.
We are taking a poetic warning about the end of an era or a mindset and turning it into a multi-billion-dollar aerospace business plan.
We are trying to outrun a metaphor with rocket fuel.
That is wild.
It is. And the source pushes this logical deconstruction even further, looking at the internal consistency of the literal reading.
Okay, let's hear it.
Take the classic Christian prophecy that when the end comes and the sun is darkened, Jesus will return on a cloud.
Okay, standard Sunday school image.
Right. But the author applies rigorous, basic logic to this sequence of events.
Let's track the physics of that.
Go for it.
If the sun has stopped shining, as the previous verse dictates, and the Earth is frozen solid near absolute zero, there is no thermal energy.
Zero thermal energy.
If there is no heat, there is absolutely no evaporation of water.
And if there is no water evaporation, there can be no condensation. Therefore, there can be no physical clouds in the sky.
Oh my God.
A literal cloud cannot exist in the meteorological scenario described by a literal reading of the exact same text.
The text contradicts itself within a single paragraph if you force it to conform to physical atmospheric reality.
Exactly. It breaks its own rules if you make it literal.
So if the physical sky isn't literally falling and the cosmos is a metaphor, what is the actual decoded meaning? What is the author proposing these cosmic symbols represent?
According to this analytical framework, the sun, moon, and stars in these foundational texts are not celestial bodies of gas and rock.
Okay, then what are they?
They are metaphors for systems of light, specifically systems of spiritual leadership, guidance, and religious or societal structures.
Systems of light. So illumination.
Yes. The sun represents the highest authorities, or the core illuminating truth of an era. The moon represents the structures that reflect that light, perhaps the priesthood or secondary leaders.
Because the moon doesn't have its own light, it reflects the sun.
Beautifully put, exactly. And the stars are the myriad of individual teachers or guides spread out in the darkness.
Ah, okay. So when the text says the sun goes dark and the stars fall, it's not describing the physical destruction of the Milky Way galaxy.
Not at all.
It's describing a profound societal and spiritual revolution. It's the collapse of an old world order, the failure of outdated teachings to provide illumination, and the fall of corrupt leaders from their high positions of authority.
Exactly. It's the end of an age, not the end of the physical dirt and rock. It's a psychological apocalypse, a clearing out of the old structures to make way for a new understanding.
That makes infinitely more sense than sentient shrubbery or vaporized planets.
It really does. It gives the text so much more gravity.
But if we accept that the cosmos is a metaphor, we have to bring this down to Earth. Because the scriptures are also absolutely full of earthly elements acting in impossible ways.
Oh, the natural world is full of this stuff.
Yeah, we have talking animals, singing trees, and magical landscapes. What happens to the natural world when we apply this decoded lens?
The author transitions brilliantly from the sky to the soil to explain this earthly metaphorical system. In the book of Deuteronomy, for instance, there's a verse that says, "My teaching shall drop as the rain."
Okay.
In the sealed language of these texts, rain is consistently used as a metaphor for the word, the truth, or spiritual teachings descending from above.
Okay, if the rain is the teaching, then it logically follows that the things the rain falls upon
Are the people.
Right.
The dirt, the grass, the trees, the vegetables, the vegetation. These all represent humanity. Different types of plants represent different states of receptivity in the people receiving those teachings.
So when Isaiah talks about the mountains singing and the trees of the field clapping their hands, we shouldn't be picturing a literal Disney movie animation with smiling oak trees and dancing pines.
No, it's a profound, joyous metaphor for humanity. The trees are people, and clapping their hands represents different groups of people entering a state of profound spiritual awakening and celebration because they have received the rain of truth.
I love that. It takes the surreal, cartoonish imagery and turns it into a beautiful description of human joy.
It grounds it in human experience.
But the author takes it a step further, and this is where the imagery gets genuinely wild. We have to talk about the animal kingdom in these texts.
The monsters.
Yeah, specifically the great red dragon, or the beast from the book of Revelation that is described as having 7 heads, 10 horns, and being a chimera made of parts of a leopard, a bear, and a lion.
When you read that literally, it sounds like a horrific monster movie or, the ravings of someone hallucinating.
Like a Godzilla script.
Yeah. But the author points out that the text itself actually hands you the decoder ring if you just pay attention to the internal definitions.
It tells you what it means.
It does. In Revelation chapter 12, the text explicitly defines what the great red dragon is. It says the dragon is that ancient serpent who is called the devil or Satan.
Right. It tells the reader outright, hey, this dragon is not a biological reptile. It is a metaphor for a deceiving spirit, a destructive psychological force.
Exactly. But the author notes a fascinating, almost tragic cultural clash here regarding how this symbol migrated.
Yes, the author addresses this directly, particularly looking at Chinese culture, right?
Yes. Because these texts and symbols were transmitted globally over centuries, they crashed into and merged with existing cultural mythologies.
Right, things get lost in translation.
Completely.
Mm-hmm.
Traditional Chinese culture, as it stands today, literally reveres the dragon. Many Chinese people refer to themselves as the descendants of the dragon.
Which is an incredible historical irony, right? Because according to the author's tracing of the symbol, the heavy codified reverence for the dragon in China actually evolved much later.
Yeah, it wasn't always there in that specific form.
The author points out that it solidified around the Tang dynasty, heavily influenced by imported Buddhist concepts. Specifically, the concept of the Naga, which were snake-like water deities in Indian mythology, was translated into Chinese as the dragon.
Exactly. So you have a massive cultural shift where a society begins identifying deeply with a symbol that, in the foundational scriptural texts, explicitly represents the ultimate deceiving spirit.
It's a massive metaphorical mix-up born from literalizing ancient symbols across cultural boundaries.
It is. And it's not just mythical dragons. The author points to very common everyday animals used as harsh metaphors.
Like what?
Well, in Isaiah, there's a critique of dumb dogs that cannot bark, sleeping, lying down, loving to slumber.
And the really famous one about the pigs?
Right, the incredibly famous phrase from the New Testament, do not throw your pearls to swine.
If you take that literally, without the decoder ring, you might think the ancient prophets just had a bizarre, irrational hatred for dogs and pigs.
Like they were just weirdly anti-pet.
Yeah. You might think it's a primitive form of animal cruelty, but the author decodes it based on the behavioral characteristics of the animals used.
Yes, it's all about behavior. A dumb dog that cannot bark is a highly specific metaphor for an ignorant watchman.
Because a watchdog's only job is to bark when danger approaches.
Precisely. So a dumb dog is a corrupt or blind leader, perhaps a religious leader or a politician who sees spiritual or societal danger coming to their community, but they stay completely silent.
Why are they silent?
Because they are lazy or compromised or afraid of losing their position. They have the eyes to see the text, but no true knowledge. They have mouths, but they refuse to speak the truth to protect the flock.
That is a harsh metaphor, but really effective. And the swine. What is the psychological state of the pig in this framework?
The swine represents a state of being completely, utterly consumed by the physical, material world.
Because they roll in the mud.
Right. A pig looks down at the mud. It doesn't look up at the sky.
Yeah.
A person in a swine state is unable to appreciate or even recognize spiritual or intellectual value.
Okay, that makes sense.
Therefore, if you hand a literal pig a literal pearl, it will trample it, because a pearl has no nutritional value to a pig. It can't eat it, so it destroys it.
So the warning, do not throw pearls to swine, means If you hand a person who is deeply entrenched in a materialistic, ego-driven state of mind, a profound spiritual truth, a pearl of wisdom, they won't just fail to understand it.
No, they'll hate it.
They will actively mock it, trample the idea, and likely attack you for presenting it to them.
It's a psychological warning about discernment. Be careful who you share deep truths with.
That is so practical.
It is. What's fascinating here is how literalism robs the text of all this psychological depth and practical utility. A literal beast with 7 heads is just a scary CGI monster. You can't learn anything from a monster except to run away.
But a metaphorical beast, one made up of the stealth of a leopard, the crushing weight of a bear, the devouring mouth of a lion that changes everything.
It gives you a way to identify real-world problems.
Exactly. That represents an oppressive political system that sneaks up on you, crushes your freedoms, and devours your resources. Or it represents a deeply destructive human mindset of greed and violence.
Yeah, that is something you can actually analyze, fight, and overcome in your own life or in your society.
It shifts the entire genre of the text from a bizarre fantasy novel to a highly sophisticated psychological and political survival manual.
And that is a genre worth reading.
Okay, I am following this, and the decoded metaphors for the cosmos and the animals are incredibly elegant. But this is where I think the hardest pushback from a listener is going to come.
I know exactly what you're going to say.
People say, fine, I can accept that a 7-headed dragon is a metaphor. I can accept that falling stars is poetry. But surely the people and the places were real. Jerusalem is a real place on a literal map. Egypt is a real country.
The geography question?
Let's look at why the author argues that the human history and the geography in these texts are also fundamentally metaphorical templates.
This is where the paradigm shift requires the most heavy lifting for the modern reader, honestly.
Because it attacks history directly.
Because it directly assaults our understanding of historical reality. The author argues that names, geographical locations, and major figures in these texts are not primarily historical records. They are spiritual templates.
Templates, like placeholders for concepts. Can you give me an example of how the author breaks down the geography?
Sure. Let's look at the major geopolitical players in the texts: Egypt, Babylon, Jerusalem, Sodom. In the context of the sealed parables, the author argues these are not meant to be read as GPS coordinates on a physical map.
They aren't latitude and longitude.
No. They represent spiritual states of being.
Okay, let's unpack why the ancient authors would choose those specific places. Why Egypt?
Well, think about the historical context of Egypt in the ancient world. It was a place of immense physical monument building, driven by slave labor, completely obsessed with the material preservation of the body. The mummies, the pyramids.
Very material focused.
Very. Therefore, Egypt becomes the perfect metaphorical template for a state of spiritual slavery to the physical world. It represents being trapped in the material in base desires.
Okay, what about Babylon?
Babylon comes from the story of the Tower of Babel, a story of scattered languages and confusion. Therefore, Babylon represents a state of profound spiritual confusion, doctrinal chaos, and corruption.
And Jerusalem.
Jerusalem, which translates to City of Peace, represents a state of internal peace, enlightenment, and alignment with truth.
And the author brings up a genuinely wild piece of evidence for this from the book of Revelation, right? A verse that seems to explicitly prove the geography is a code.
Yes.
Yeah.
The author points to a specific verse in Revelation chapter 11. It mentions a great city where our Lord was crucified.
Now, historically and traditionally, everyone agrees that the physical crucifixion of Jesus happened in the physical city of Jerusalem.
Right, that's unquestioned dogma.
But the text in Revelation explicitly says that this exact same city is spiritually called Sodom and Egypt.
Boom.
Right there. That is a smoking gun. It proves the text itself is intentionally using geography as a spiritual descriptor, not a literal map.
It tells you it's a spiritual code.
If the physical city of Jerusalem is spiritually called Sodom, then Sodom isn't just a physical town that got destroyed by fire in the book of Genesis. It's a state of deep moral decay and corruption that can exist anywhere at any time, even in the holy city.
Exactly. It completely detaches the moral lesson from the physical geography. And if the places are templates, the author applies the exact same logic to the people.
The famous characters?
Yeah. Noah, Moses, Lot, Abraham, even foundational philosophers in other traditions like Laozi in the Tao Te Ching.
Let's focus on Noah's Ark, because the author uses this story to apply brutal, basic logic to prove it is a metaphorical template.
The logic is pretty undeniable.
This is the story we paint on nursery walls for literal babies. It is deeply ingrained as a physical event. Let's really think about the logistics the author is challenging here.
The author challenges the reader to simply look at the math provided in the text itself.
The actual measurements.
The text gives specific dimensions for the ark: 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, 30 cubits high. That is roughly the size of a small, modern cargo ship, significantly smaller than an aircraft carrier.
Okay.
And you are tasked with fitting a male and female of every single animal species on Earth onto this wooden boat.
Let's just visualize that. You have to fit full-grown elephants, giraffes, hippos, rhinoceroses.
Just the big ones take up half the space.
And you have to fit violently predatory beasts, lions, tigers, grizzly bears, crocodiles. First of all, the sheer cubic volume of the animals exceeds the cubic volume of the boat.
Math doesn't work.
It is a physical impossibility just in terms of spatial geometry.
And that's before you even address the biological survival logistics. The text says they were on the ark for roughly 150 days before the waters receded.
5 months.
How do you feed a global ecosystem on a wooden boat for 5 months?
Right. The carnivores alone destroy the narrative. A pair of lions needs a constant supply of fresh meat. Are there spare, sacrificial gazelles on the ark?
They didn't pack a freezer.
If the lions eat the gazelle species goes extinct. If they don't eat the gazelles, the lions starve to death and go extinct.
It's a paradox.
What about the waste management for tens of thousands of animals in an enclosed, unventilated wooden box? The ammonia buildup alone would be lethal in days. It is a logistical, biological impossibility from every conceivable angle.
And this is the brilliant crux of the author's argument, that impossibility is entirely intentional.
Intentional, they knew it was absurd.
Yes. The author posits that the ancient writers were not stupid.
Yeah.
They were highly sophisticated observers of nature. They wrote an impossible physical scenario precisely to force the reader to stop reading it physically.
It's almost like a Zen koan.
Like a riddle meant to break your mind.
Like a master teacher giving a student a math problem that intentionally has no mathematical solution. Not so the student solves it, but so the student eventually throws their hands up and realizes they're using the wrong formula entirely.
The absurdity is the point.
It's meant to break your literal mind so your spiritual mind can open.
That is a perfect analogy. The physical impossibility is the signpost pointing to the metaphor. The ark isn't a boat. It's a state of spiritual preservation during a time of overwhelming societal chaos, the flood of lies or destructive behavior.
But this brings up a huge existential question for believers. If Noah and Moses are metaphors, does the author believe anyone in these texts actually existed? Was there a real guy named Moses?
The author's stance is that whether they existed historically is secondary and ultimately irrelevant to the purpose of the text.
It just doesn't matter.
Right. Their physical history doesn't matter. Their names are functional symbols. The name Moses in Hebrew means drawn out of the water. Lauzi means old child. Abraham means father of multitude.
So the name is the clue.
The names tell you exactly what the character represents in the evolution of the human psyche.
And the author uses the concept of the true Jew from the New Testament book of Romans to hammer this home, right? Let's talk about that, because the geopolitical implications of this specific metaphor are staggering.
Yes, this is huge. The author points to Romans chapter 2, which explicitly redefines the concept of a Jew.
How does it redefine it?
It states that a true Jew is not one outwardly meaning, not by physical circumcision, not by genetic birthright, not by physical lineage.
Okay, so not a biological or ethnic category.
Right. Rather, a true Jew is one inwardly, by the Spirit, by a circumcision of the heart.
Okay, let's walk through the modern thought experiment of what happens when you take that seriously.
The real-world implication.
If the text itself says a true Jew is a spiritual state of being a person whose heart is aligned with the divine, and if Jerusalem, as we discussed earlier, is a spiritual state of peace,
then fighting physical wars with literal bombs and tanks over literal strips of geography in the Middle East completely tragically misses the entire spiritual point of the foundational texts those wars are often based upon.
That is utterly chilling. Humanity is literally shedding blood generation after generation over a mistranslated metaphor.
We're killing each other over poetry we didn't understand.
Unthinking obedience to traditional, literal history creates a terrifying blind spot. We are fighting over the dirt when the text was trying to teach us about the mind.
And this blind spot isn't just an academic issue about ancient boats or maps of the Middle East.
That's very personal.
When we take metaphors literally, it has devastating, intimately painful, real-world consequences on human lives, particularly when it comes to social structures and power dynamics. This brings us to what the author considers the most critical and, frankly, the darkest part of the analysis.
The danger of literalism regarding gender.
Yes.
The author examines texts from the New Testament, specifically letters attributed to Paul, like 1 Timothy and 1 Corinthians.
The verses that have caused so much pain.
These are the infamous verses that dictate that women must remain silent in the churches, that they are not permitted to speak, that they must be in full submission, and perhaps most shockingly, that women will be saved through childbearing.
Now, read literally as they have been by religious institutions for 2 millennia. These verses have been weaponized to construct and justify centuries of systemic patriarchy.
I mean, they are the foundational texts for silencing women.
According to the author's analysis, the literal reading of these specific verses has been used to silence women, force them into domestic subservience, deny them leadership roles in their communities, and essentially reduce their fundamental spiritual worth to their biological reproductive capacity.
It's important to note how vehemently the author critiques this outcome. The analysis frames this adherence to the literal tradition of these gender verses as barbaric.
The author does not hold back on this.
No, they don't. And the author references oppressive regimes and highly conservative cultures around the world today that still enforce these literal readings, often violently, systematically erasing women from public life based on a reading of a text.
To illustrate the real-world, localized pain of this literalism, the author shares an incredibly powerful sensory personal anecdote.
The soup story.
Yes. The author grew up in a 72nd generation traditional Confucian family, deeply steeped in traditional, literalist, cultural practices that strictly separated gender roles based on ancient texts.
Paint that picture for us, because the details in the analysis really bring the theory down to the dinner table.
Okay, so at family dinners, the hierarchy was physically manifested in the food.
Wow. In the food?
Yeah. The grandfather, the father, and the author, who is the son, sat at the main table in the center of the room. They were served the rich food, the full chicken soup, the heavy meats, the nourishing meals.
And the women of the family, where were they in this literalist hierarchy?
The mother, the sisters, and the grandmother were relegated to a separate, smaller table, often hidden away from the main space.
Just physically marginalized.
And when the author looked closely at their bowls, they didn't have the meat. They just had the empty, thin broth.
That is heartbreaking.
The literal interpretation of tradition was literally taking the physical nourishment out of the women's mouths.
He was starving them.
The author recognized this as inherently deeply unjust. At 19 years old, upon gaining some measure of authority as a male in the family structure, the author actually rebelled against this cultural literalism and abolished the segregated eating practice in their home.
It's a visceral, heartbreaking example. It shows how a philosophy, when taken literally, starves people.
It hurts real bodies.
But here is the incredible pivot of the entire analysis. If we apply the sealed scroll decoding to these oppressive verses, if the text isn't actually talking about biological men and women, what is the true metaphor?
The author decodes it, and it is a stunning, paradigm-altering flip.
I am ready for this. Let's hear it.
In the metaphorical spiritual language of these texts, the author posits that woman absolutely does not mean a biological female.
Okay.
And man, or husband, does not mean a biological male.
Okay, let's unpack this carefully, because this redefines thousands of years of theology. What do they represent?
Woman represents the receiver, the believer, the church, the human entity or mind that is waiting to receive truth.
Because it receives the seed.
Exactly. Husband or man represents God or the divine, the ultimate giver of truth. The seed that the man gives is the word of God.
So if we take that decoder ring and apply it to the verse that says the woman must be silent and learn in submission,
it completely loses its patriarchal venom.
it means something entirely different.
It means the human mind, the believer, regardless of biological gender, must quiet its ego. It must stop constantly speaking its own worldly, uneducated opinions and humbly, quietly open itself to receive the truth from the divine.
It is a universal instruction about intellectual and spiritual humility.
It has absolutely nothing to do with biological women being forced to keep their mouths shut in a physical building.
And what about the verse that has arguably done the most damage? The one that says women are saved through childbearing. The verse that literally reduced a woman's spiritual salvation to her ability to produce physical babies.
Again, apply the code. If the seed is the word of God and the woman is the humble believer receiving that word, then childbirth is not physical labor in a hospital.
What is it?
Childbirth is the agonizing, beautiful process of birthing spiritual truth within yourself. It's about bringing new, enlightened life into the world and generating new believers by sharing that internalized truth.
You are saved by taking in the word and producing spiritual fruit.
Exactly.
And the author provides a piece of textual evidence for this that is just completely undeniable. They point to a verse written by Paul in the book of Galatians.
This is the mic drop moment for the gender argument.
Paul, who everyone agrees is biologically a man, writes a letter to his followers saying, "My little children, for whom I am again in the anguish of childbirth until Christ is formed in you."
Exactly. Paul, a biological man, is explicitly claiming to be in labor pains.
He's literally saying he's in childbirth.
If a biological man can be in childbirth, then the concept of childbearing in the lexicon of these texts is definitively, irrefutably a metaphor for spiritual mentorship and development.
The author frames this as a stunning tragedy of reading comprehension.
The biggest reading error in history.
By taking a beautiful, universally applicable spiritual metaphor about internal growth, the humbling of the human ego, and the birthing of truth, and reading it as a literal biological mandate. Humanity accidentally created a theological justification for thousands of years of systemic patriarchy and the oppression of half the human race.
It is a profound tragedy. The author's point is that literalism isn't just silly like the duck crackers. It's actively dangerous. It weaponizes poetry.
It takes tools meant for liberation and turns them into chains.
It really does. And this dangerous literalism doesn't just stay in the big societal structures like gender and war. It leaks into our daily mundane habits and rituals as well, which the author touches on with an analysis of dietary laws.
Right, the segment on dietary purity. The analysis briefly looks at religious dietary laws, specifically the strict prohibition against eating pork found in texts like Leviticus in the Bible or the Quran.
Now, a literalist approaches those texts and says, God hates pigs. Pigs are physically, inherently dirty animals. Therefore, if I put physical pig meat into my physical mouth and digest it, my immortal soul becomes tainted and impure.
But the author argues against the biology of that entirely. Literal pigs are not inherently dirty.
Oh, they are.
They only roll in mud to cool down because they don't sweat. They're actually highly intelligent animals, and from a purely biological chemical standpoint, pig fat is relatively clean energy.
There is nothing magically evil about the molecules of a pig.
So why the intense codified ban in the texts?
Because, as the author argues, the pig is a metaphor. We have to remember the rule of the sealed scroll. Think back to the pearls and the swine.
The animal represents a mindset.
The pig represents a highly specific spiritual and psychological state, a state of gluttony, of being entirely walled off in the mud of worldly material desires, of lacking any spiritual discernment or higher aspirations.
So the warning isn't about your dinner plate, it's about your character.
Exactly.
Avoiding physical pork on your plate while simultaneously acting out the pig metaphor in your daily life, being greedy, being selfish, being obsessed with hoarding wealth or power, entirely misses the point of the scripture.
Precisely. You can have a perfectly halal or completely kosher diet, adhering strictly to the literal laws, and still possess the spiritual diet and character of a swine.
To illustrate how completely arbitrary our literal ideas of purity are, the author mentions a wild anecdote about cultural relativity.
The dog meat story.
The author once fed a friend dog meat without the friend knowing what it was.
Yes. And when the friend eventually found out they had consumed dog, they had a complete emotional and psychological breakdown.
They felt physically tainted, deeply horrified, and morally compromised.
Because in their culture, a dog is a companion, a family member. Eating it is a profound taboo.
But then the author contrasts this reaction with how traditional Indian culture reveres the cow.
Right. If you eat a juicy beef hamburger in front of a devout Hindu, they will experience the exact same emotional horror and breakdown that the friend experienced over the dog meat.
What this brilliantly highlights is how localized and entirely arbitrary our literal interpretations of clean and unclean animals are.
It's all relative to the literal culture.
A dog is man's best friend in one culture and a protein source in another. A cow is an industrial fit product in one culture and a sacred, untouchable being in another. Physical purity based on animal classification is an illusion constructed by geography and tradition.
But the metaphorical meanings, the psychological state of the greedy swine, the ignorant dumb dog, the oppressive beast, those states of being are universal.
They apply to every human on Earth, regardless of what's in their refrigerator.
That is the core takeaway. If we connect this to the bigger picture the author is painting, our cherished traditions are very often just fossilized, literal interpretations of ancient, vibrant metaphors.
We get stuck on the physical action.
We get so caught up in the rigid physical rituals, don't eat this specific meat, wear this specific fabric on your head, sit in this specific building on this specific day of the week, that we completely forget what the ritual was actually pointing to in the first place.
We fall in love with the signpost and never travel down the road.
That is exactly it.
Breaking free from that fossilized literalism requires acknowledging a fundamental truth. The ancient texts were trying to teach us how to be, not what to eat or what to wear.
It requires a profound, often uncomfortable shift in how we engage with authority and how we read text. The author makes the conclusion incredibly clear. As long as we insist on reading the sealed parables literally, we are trapped.
We are stuck in the past.
We are trapped in the past, fighting endless wars over dead history and literal geography, and we are completely missing the blueprint for our own spiritual and societal evolution.
So, what does this all mean for us today? We've unpacked a truly monumental theory for you on this deep dive.
We covered a lot of ground.
We really did. We started with the comic absurdity of people hoarding duck crackers because they thought literal stars were going to fall from the sky.
The physics of a frozen Earth.
We looked at the impossible mathematical and biological logistics of trying to fit a global ecosystem onto a small wooden boat called Noah's Ark.
And the heartbreak of empty bowls of chicken soup.
And the profound, tragic misreading of gender roles that accidentally silenced half the human race for millennia.
The overarching lesson from this analysis is that treating ancient sealed parables as literal history doesn't just create quirky logical absurdities.
It's not just a harmless mistake.
No, it is actively shaped and very often harmed real human societies, human relationships, and human psychology for thousands of years.
The invitation here, based on the author's work, is to practice active, relentless discernment. To look at the texts, the cultural traditions, and the foundational assumptions you've been handed since childhood, and dare to ask the hard question. Is this a literal fact, or is it a vehicle for a much deeper, much more demanding truth?
It's about taking the responsibility of interpretation back into your own hands.
Yes.
It's about refusing to be a dumb dog that accepts the surface without barking, or a swine that tramples the metaphorical pearl because it's too focused on the literal mud.
And that is our challenge to you, the listener, as we wrap up this deep dive. Take a hard look at your own beliefs, whatever background you come from. Have you been taking the clouds, the stars, or the animals in your own life completely literally?
Are you waiting for a physical rescue?
Exactly. Are you waiting for a literal physical rescue ship, whether that's a religious savior coming from the sky or a billionaire's rocket ship going to Mars to save you from the apocalypse?
Or are you willing to do the hard work yourself?
Are you willing to do the incredibly hard internal work of decoding the metaphors in your own psyche and evolving yourself?
The answers to our biggest problems aren't likely found in the literal past, but in the decoded present.
And I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over.
Lay it on them.
If the author of this analysis is right, and the most foundational texts in human history, the books that launched massive empires, started endless wars, and shaped the core morality of the globe are actually elaborate, encrypted codes just waiting for the right era to be unlocked. What other widely accepted historical facts in our cultural DNA are actually just profound metaphors that we simply haven't lived long enough or grown wise enough to decode yet? Keep questioning, keep reading between the lines, and keep diving deep.